So today, as you guys have heard through all those emails, we were talking about biomimicry, and it's actually exactly what it sounds like. So as you can see up there, it is the design idea of looking at structures that exist in nature and how we can implement those into our own human technology, and really looking and sort of making sure that we get a handle on our designs being in a sustainable vein. So if we look at how nature has evolved over the years, and we look at those strategies that work in that context, that's how we know that we're creating designs that are going to work in the overall context, instead of just doing whatever we want to do just because we have the means to do it. So the general idea here is that nature on Earth, been around the whole time, has 3.8 billion years of research and development. And so if we look, we can see some emerging patterns. All throughout human history, we've been looking and trying to unlock nature's secrets. And so when we see those patterns, we need to recognize the strengths and weaknesses of those and how we can harness that informational flow to our advantage in design. And so a main 6 principles really come out of that body of work that we have. And so we call these life's principles. And I like to think of them as sort of nature's sustainability guide. It's how nature sees opportunities and leverages to make life conducive to other life. We're going to run through these. We're going to talk about them in more detail. Okay, so we have be resource efficient, pretty self-explanatory, evolve to survive, adapt to changing conditions, integrate development and growth, being locally attuned and responsive, and using life-friendly chemistry. And so those are our life's principles, and what I want you guys to think of when we're talking about these, if you think about the Earth like a bowl, and then you think about nature's way of doing things as a marble in the bowl. So if you were to move the bowl and things were to change, the marble is going to move along with the bowl naturally. So a lot of the times what we create as humans, it's like throwing a square in the middle of the bowl, and it doesn't move fluidly when you move the bowl, and we try to compensate and backtrack and hold the bowl still instead of making things that can flow with the system that is out of our control. So, getting into our first principle, we have evolve to survive. And so it's a little picture of meiosis, which I'm sure everybody's been over in their introductory biology class. So nature's way of shaking up the deck, you have genetic mutations, and that can lead to advantages and disadvantages, and anything that comes out of that is either incorporated into the system or it's deemed not a good choice, so we don't pass that along. And I'm not suggesting that in our technology we make it able to replicate itself with variation and making that choice, but what we need to do as the creators of the technology is have the ability to evolve our mindset and sort of work on how we're actually going about working on these design challenges. So this one, probably the most tangential to actual design principles, but still really important on an overall mindset about what we're doing as engineers, architects, and designers of other kind. Okay, so these two go really hand in hand together. So being resource efficient and being locally tuned and responsive are really important that you do those together, because you can't really be resource efficient if you're not living locally and you're thinking about what your local resources are. So one example for being resource efficient is the anatomy of birds. They have evolved so that their bones, as most people know, are hollow, and they put all of their material into the stress points so that they're lightweight, but they can still endure, and it gives them the ability to fly. So they're not wasting anything. There's no excess in that area, and it lets them do their function the best that they can. So the cardinal rule of biology is fitting form to function, and the birds are exhibiting this, your DNA is exhibiting that, the angle from the hydrogen bonds and all of the molecules is exactly correct so that things line up and work the right way. So when you're designing things, it's more of a, don't just put that piece there because it works or it looks cool. Make sure that this piece is going there because it needs to serve this purpose with those materials. It's very dedicated, and you need to be intentional. And so when we're talking about locally tuned, the prairie dog has a really good example of how it makes its burrows. It orients those in the wind so that the wind, which is a cyclical earth process, is naturally cooling its burrow. So a big idea behind all this biomimetic design is that the earth is unpredictable. It's dynamic, but all that it has that we have to predict off of are these cyclical processes. And if you can find ways, like a prairie dog, to take that information and harness it and make a good choice so that you're using lower energy by taking advantage of a leverage point in the system, that's going to lead to a better design. Okay. All right, so obviously you need to be able to adapt. Changing with that dynamic non-equilibrium is a given. You can't design something today that is going to be perfect for 20 years down the road. It's impossible to know. But what you can do is use smaller components that can change and build your design so that it's easier to take apart. If you look at an instance where we have really failed, if you look at all of our infrastructure and the crumbling roads and everything, we did not build our transportation system in a way that is easy to change. We built it in a very finite, it's going to be this way, and then when it got, a little bit decimated, it's almost impossible to fix it readily. So good examples that nature has is the fox is a smart creature. In the summer, it will be brown so that, blends in, and then in the winter, it changes around to white. It's pretty simple, but it's taking that cue from the environment and changing what it does there. And our own immune systems are incredibly, incredibly powerful at the second part about embodying resilience through variation, redundancy, and decentralization. What I mean about that is that resilience is imperative if your design is going to last, but you can't just say, I want my design to be resilient. You need to think about ways that you can actually make it such. So if you vary your means to achieve a specific function, if you have multiple systems working to achieve one goal, if one gets knocked out, then you're still able to achieve your goal. So that's what we're talking about with variation. The immune system has different types of cells. It's adapting. Has variation. Redundancy, it's not just one thing. You have tons of cells. They're all there. If a few die, it's not a big deal. And decentralization, you can't have one center control center. You need everything to operate on its own, which these cells in this system do a good job of. If you look at the central nervous system, not so much. If you have a brain injury, all your other systems are affected. Okay, so here's a really important design principle. It's in integrating development and growth. I think a lot of people, if you were to look up these terms, would view these as synonyms when really in this context they're not. Growth is the sheer adding on or approaching the goal that you're working for. So in the case of the embryo, the growth is after your cells have differentiated and you're just growing to become a mature baby. That is growth. What is development? Development is investing in the platform for growth. This is really important. So in development, you have your stem cells, you divide, originally you're staying as more stem cells. You don't immediately differentiate. You're building up your supply to move forward to the growth phase. I think that in a lot of our planning, as engineers, city planners, we get lost on growth and we don't think about development. We just want to go. We just want to build things up. We want to do it now. And our growth doesn't suffer because we take from other areas. That's where a lot of our sustainability challenges are coming from, because we just focus on growth and don't take the time to invest in the platform for that growth. So ways to do that, once again, you have your modular nested components. So you use things that are small like cells. Building from the bottom up, when a tree needs leaves, it doesn't roll out a sheet of leaf material and cut out its leaves and have them go on the tree from there. It grows them cell by cell. That's a really, really simple idea, but if you think about how we do everything in manufacturing, we do it wrong. It's just, we need to change our perspective and go from small steps to a big goal and see where those steps can take us, and not just start with the big goal and figure out how to get there. Okay, so our last point here on life's principles, life-friendly chemistry. I enjoyed choosing snake venom for life friendly. It was a good time. So how snake venom is life friendly chemistry is it's an impeccable example of a really harmful toxin in nature that has a really tight closed loop life cycle. So when a snake injects its prey with its venom, it kills it, and then it eats it. After the digestive process, there's no remnant of that toxin anywhere. The snake is able to break down all of those toxins internally and then use the building blocks again. That's like 10 out of 10 would recycle that way. We can't, like, we have no means. We use all these terrible chemicals and they're just leaking out everywhere and we're trying to store them, but the snake's just like, yep, got that thing that could kill things and now I'm just gonna break it down and use it again. And then a sub point here that is actually pretty difficult to do, but is important, is to do our chemistry in water. If you think about how things are really made, and materials and everything, a lot of our solvents are harsh things that are abrasive to the environment. That's why we have so much hazardous waste. You just hear about the hazardous waste, but you don't hear about why we have a lot of that. And it has a lot to do with our material processes. And so if we work to be able to do our chemistry in water, think about your own bodies. Think about how you're able to make bone and enamel in your own body, and that's such an incredibly resilient structure. But we need to create X and X tons of waste to be able to build one car. Like, if we could think about how we can push the envelope to do our chemistry in water, we're gonna be able to make a lot of advances on having less waste. So those are our life principles that really talk about what biomimicry is and learning from nature and how we can, just by adding that idea to our process, will lead you to a sustainable design. This is a specific example from the research I did at the University of Georgia last summer that I want to talk about trying to implement some of these ideas. The example's not perfect, but as it's going to be, the transition is never 0 to 100. You're gonna have to take steps. Okay, so here's our problem definition. You have patients with chronic incurable eye disease, like age-related macular degeneration, glaucoma, etc. So we can't cure that. We don't have a cure right now, but what we do have are a lot of treatments to prevent blindness. And so a lot of those drugs are injectable drugs that you have to get once a month. You're taking an injection to the eye. So my principal investigator, his project was to create an implantable, bio-friendly device that you would go under one procedure and then it passively diffuses drugs through it so that you no longer have to have that monthly injection. The idea here was to make it refillable, so you went from having a monthly injection to one procedure and then a refilling procedure every 2 years. And then that refilling procedure is just the same injection that you would get to get drugs delivered. So we're gonna break down the device a little bit. This part is the casing, so it's just the outside, so that when you put it across the sclera here in surgery, you're not having a lot of, inflammatory, anything that you don't want in the eye. Casing, important. All right, hydrogel. This guy is loaded with drugs, and then you're gonna put these channels in front of that hydrogel, and those channels have nano and micro geometries to control the flow of drugs through them. So that was what my project is about. We wanted to control the diffusion rate and look at those filtrations and still hit our drug delivery, but his previous device, as you can see, is it's right angled, it's very well defined, it's pretty human made. It doesn't look like something you would find in the body. And so when you get down to biomimetic design, the first question you have to ask yourself is, what is the function of my design? And what I came up with is what we're doing here is we're filtering. That's what we're doing. We're just doing it in a way that we hit a time. We're not trying to exclude anything, but all it is passive. We're filtering. And so one of the biological structures we came up with to look at was the lymph node. And so when fluid travels through there, you're reading a lot of the content and you're getting a lot of feedback, and it would have been awesome to be able to make a device that had dynamic feedbacks, but our technology isn't there. So what we tried to do was to implement some of the architecture behind this lymph node. And these channels are sort of varying the difference in number of channels across an actual lymph node. The dimensions are similar. You can stack the channels to get the actual 3D representation of the lymph node. And then you test them. And so to make these guys, we did soft lithography, minus points for life-friendly chemistry. That has a lot of harsh solvents in it, but that's how we can do things on the nanoscale right now. And then once you have this silicon wafer, you can just pour a PDMS, which is just a biofriendly polymer, over it, and you have these microchannels. And so when you're testing those for the diffusion rate, you're hoping that this guy is similar to that guy. But as you can see, it's pretty clear there's still sharp angles in here. We're technologically limited. We can't do this procedure on round images. Believe me, I had CAD drawings of things that looked almost exactly like that, and I brought it in, and they were just like, can't not be able to make that. It's like, well, you take the inspiration and you take it in stride, and it's about working to change your ideas. If me and that principal investigator hadn't sat down and thought about how do we make this more contextualized, how do we think about other things, we would never look at this. That's not something you're thinking about when you're thinking about treating an eye disease. So my main takeaways, now that we're done with that, are that if you're an architect, if you're an engineer, if you're designing things, if you're working on policy, think about, checking your hubris a little bit and looking at what nature has come up with in all of these years, and look at those structures, because chances are there's something pretty related or exactly the solution you're looking for, and it's probably better than the one you're going to come up with. So look at those, get inspired, and make some sustainable designs. All right. Questions?
It's really amazing and awesome. So he's going to do questions, but you should put the first slide back up there so it brightens up the room there. Or wherever you want. Any slide, maybe people might want to go back to a slide.
All right.
All right, hit them with those questions, because we knew there were going to be some hard questions from this group.
Guaranteed.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, what exactly was the disease again? So like you
Okay. So the disease is a wide variety. So like what we were talking about, there are like 7 to 8 eye diseases that threaten your vision that you can't really cure. And they each have different drugs that have been developed to treat them. So we're looking at it from just a treatment perspective. So you could tailor those geometries to each drug. So in my actual report, I made 4 or 5 different geometries for different drugs. You just have to change the size, so you go with the concentration profile. And so once you tailor them to each drug and you have that mold made for that drug, it's just a matter of making those channels, and then you could put them into the same overall device. Yeah?
You talk about all these like biological processes and
Yeah.
how you can use those to make sustainable processes, but how do you scale those up to the industrial scale?
So that's difficult, but what that takes is like, one of the most important things about this is like an ideological change. You have whole companies built off of these principles, and they're doing things industrially. One of my favorite examples of a biomimetic great success on that level is I forget the name of it, there's this carpet company. And if you look in any office building or any school building, any basically public building, you see sort of that ugly, messy carpet that you would never want in your house, same company. All because this guy went to a biomimicry workshop and he said to himself, he's like, our rugs are not like the floor in the forest. And he went out in the forest, looked at how it was just stuff everywhere, and there was things and his dirt and leaves, and he was like, I'm gonna make our carpet like this. I'm gonna make it modular. They're all in squares when you go in those buildings, and I'm gonna make it messy. So like if you spill things on it, it's not a big deal. If you need to replace it, rip a square out, put only one new square in. And he built a carpet empire off of thinking that our carpets need to be like the forest floor. So if you get the ideology in the top of the chain, there's not really a limit to where you can take these sort of ideas. It just needs to be system-wide. Yeah?
So has anyone ever gotten
That specific device, no, but there are similar devices out there that are totally being used. The main advantage to that project that we were working on was the refillable aspect. Some of those that are on the market, you just implant and then you have to have another procedure and do the whole sort of surgery again instead of just an injection, because they haven't really perfected the channel hydrogel being able to get the needle in there without disrupting the channel design. But that's coming. Yep.
When you refill it, wouldn't you still have to do surgery again to like
Well,
back in?
going in, let's do this. This is easier. Okay. So see where we're putting the device? We're putting it up here across the sclera. So to enable to like suture that onto there and get it really in there, you have to go in and you have to cut a little bit, and it's like actual surgery. But you can get an incredibly thin needle and just, you know, you'd still be under. You're not gonna do this like awake, but and just putting the needle through there is a lot less invasive than the whole procedure. It's basically what that gets at.
Yeah.
So is there like a hole in the device where you can
Yeah.
just put a needle in?
Yes.
Okay, so when did people really start implementing the idea of biomimicry?
So really the chief pioneer, I really hope I don't butcher her name because she's like a personal hero, Janine Benyus, that's her name. She came up with this ideas like mid to late 80s, and it was kind of like, oh yeah, be sustainable and everything. But you know, that's a way bigger issue, I feel like, today. Like I feel like people are much more in arms about being sustainable and how we can sort of shift everything in our ideology to make it work and not just be a nice idea. But the idea itself has been around a while, but it's catching storm now. They have a Biomimicry Institute. There's a Bioneers conference every year, which is just talking about how do we use biology in actual things that are not just research, and how we can implement them into policy and everything. So I think it's picking up. It has been around a while, but definitely better today than it was then. Harpreet.
So in a society today where we're really entrenched in capitalism and this not being the most economically profitable
Yeah.
process, what do you think it would take to shift to this form of development and growth?
As with all sustainability challenges, you have to get to the point where you have to make people realize that either we're going to do this or we're not going to be around to say we didn't do this. Like, that's what it comes down to. Whether it's this approach that gets us there or a different approach that makes sustainability that far on the forefront, like, things are not good. Gotta change.
So where do you think the first starting point is? Is it Congress, or is it like individual companies doing this?
I mean, probably individual companies, you know. I think, you know, if you get down to it, business runs a lot of things. And if, you know, I think government can help business by incentivizing it, but until it's profitable and it's what businesses really want to do, then it's not going to happen. It takes more than just having good ethics to make it actually happen, but yeah. Good?
Great.
All right, so keep your eye on this guy. He's going to change your life. Eventually, at some point. Yes. All right, one more round of applause for him.